If you've ever felt like the rules of the modern world were just rewritten overnight.
And somehow nobody gave you the memo.
Right, exactly. Nobody gave you the memo. Well, you are definitely not alone.
Yeah, that disorientation is, it's incredibly common right now.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the premise of today's deep dive actually offers a really fascinating explanation as to why that exact disorientation exists.
It's a wildly different perspective than what you usually hear.
For sure. Because the argument we're looking at today suggests that the suffering modern men are experiencing, it isn't just, bad luck.
Right.
It's not just a tough economy or like shifting social norms. The author we're covering argues that it is fundamentally a linguistic virus.
A linguistic virus, which is, that is the cornerstone of his entire thesis.
Yeah.
The author basically locates the root of this modern malaise, not in political policy, but literally in the dictionary.
The dictionary, yeah. Which is such a massive paradigm shift. But before we get too far into the weeds on how this linguistic virus operates, I need to do some quick housekeeping.
Go for it.
Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button right now to support this show.
Please do.
Because today, we are undertaking a really comprehensive review of a highly requested, and I mean heavily requested, provocative new ebook.
It's been making huge waves.
Oh, massive waves. It's titled Paradox as Thought Expander.
And the subtitle is Adding Dimensions of Understanding Through Contemplation as Solar Light Casts a Shadow.
Right. It's a long one. It's written by Conrad Riker, published this year in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to tell you, the listener, right out of the gate, go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this book after you finish listening.
Yeah, you really will want the full text in front of you.
Absolutely. Because it is, it's incredibly dense.
It's a very systematic text. It reads less like a standard self-help book and much more like a diagnostic manual.
Right, a diagnostic manual for a very specific cultural architecture.
Exactly.
And we should probably set the stage regarding who this diagnostic manual is actually written for.
Yeah, context is important here.
Definitely. So, this book is written specifically for men navigating the modern landscape.
Right.
Particularly guys who are aligned with the manosphere or, men's rights advocacy, who feel that modern institutions have basically been captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
That's the core audience he's addressing.
Yeah. Now, because this material touches on highly politically charged themes, I want to make something crystal clear up front.
This is a crucial caveat.
It really is. Our role here is not to take sides, left or right. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content.
Right, we're not here to debate the politics of it.
No, not at all. We are here to neutrally and impartially unpack the fascinating arguments the author makes exactly as they are presented, so you, the listener, can understand the ideological architecture at play.
And that neutrality is so important because Riker's work asks the reader to step outside of their default cultural programming entirely.
Yeah, to sort of look at the matrix from the outside.
Exactly. To go back to that linguistic virus mentioned earlier, Riker argues that behavior which for thousands of years was universally categorized as, provision.
Right, providing for a family.
Yeah, provision. It is now routinely relabeled as privilege.
Wow. Yeah.
And the instinct for protection, right, that's reclassified as control.
That's a huge swamp.
It is. And the traditional office of fatherhood itself is redefined in modern sociology as domination.
Domination. Which, the implication there is that you cannot possibly win a game when the referee defines your standard moves as fouls before you even step onto the court.
You've lost before the whistle blows.
Right. The analogy that kept coming to mind when I was reading this section was about construction.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine you're trying to build a house, and overnight, someone sneaks into your office and swaps all your blueprints for a demolition order.
Ooh, that's a good way to look at it.
But they leave the original labels on the folders. So you think you are building a foundation, but the culture is reading your actions as tearing the neighborhood down.
That perfectly captures the disorientation he's talking about.
Right. Because if a man tries to assert a boundary, his defense is suddenly read as aggression.
Yes.
Or, if he decides to stay silent to avoid a fight, his silence is read as complicity or guilt.
Which actually introduces the first major structural mechanism Riker identifies. The way this linguistic shift is enforced in public life.
Okay, let's get into that.
He calls it the paradox of visibility.
The paradox of visibility.
Yeah. The modern cultural assumption is that total transparency is basically synonymous with honesty and virtue.
Right, we hear that all the time.
So sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Your lived experiences must be shared. The examined life has to be a fully exposed public life.
Everything has to be on TikTok or Instagram.
Exactly. But Riker draws a very sharp distinction between two entirely different types of visibility.
Okay, what are they?
First, there is what he calls epistemic visibility.
Epistemic visibility.
Right. This is the visibility of the laboratory. It exists strictly to observe and serve the truth.
Okay, like objective measurement.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, there is panoptic visibility.
Oh, panoptic, right. Pulling from Michel Foucault's concept of the panopticon.
Yes, the circular prison design.
Where the inmates can never tell if the guard is actually watching them, so they just end up policing themselves out of paranoia.
That is the exact concept. Riker argues that modern culture heavily utilizes panoptic visibility.
Interesting.
It is the visibility of the interrogation room. Its primary purpose is not to discover truth. Its purpose is to enforce control.
Okay, I want to push back on that slightly, or, at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
We live in an era of social media where everyone, men, women, teenagers, everybody is voluntarily broadcasting their lives. So is society really forcing this interrogation room on men specifically? Or is this just the modern condition of being extremely online?
That is a completely fair question, and Riker actually addresses it by pointing to a really glaring asymmetry in how privacy is culturally treated.
An asymmetry. How so?
He argues that while, yes, everyone is online, their right to withdraw from that visibility is highly gendered.
Oh, I see what you mean.
In Riker's framework, modern culture grants privacy to women as a fundamental protective right.
Right, like female-only spaces are fiercely protected.
Exactly. Protected by statute, even. Domestic violence shelters rightly have confidential addresses.
Of course.
Women's private professional networking groups are celebrated. They're seen as essential for empowerment.
Yeah, that's universally applauded.
But when men attempt to form private enclaves, when men seek the exact same structural privacy,
They get crushed.
they are immediately subjected to intense institutional suspicion.
Yeah, the culture just brands it a boys' club.
And Riker emphasizes that boys' club is no longer a neutral descriptor in our lexicon.
Oh, definitely not.
It is a prosecutorial term. A women's exclusive group is framed as communal wisdom and safety, right?
Right.
But a men's exclusive group is immediately framed as a conspiracy waiting to be unmasked.
Like a breeding ground for toxicity.
Exactly. Therefore, the culture demands total transparency from men, treating any male desire for privacy as basically an evasion of accountability.
While simultaneously championing absolute privacy for women as a matter of safety.
You nailed it. As Riker phrases it, it is a cultural one-way mirror, and men are permanently stationed on the stage side.
Wow. That one-way mirror analogy really explains the mechanics of call-out culture perfectly.
It really does.
Because Riker makes the point that call-out culture isn't just, a flawed form of justice.
Right.
He says it is structurally incapable of delivering justice because it intentionally strips away every single condition that actual justice requires.
Like time.
Time, deliberation, presumption of innocence, and most importantly, closed doors.
Exactly.
So if we accept this premise, what is a man supposed to do?
Well, he has a protocol for that.
Right, because if you were just a guy trying to survive a corporate workday where this performative visibility is practically mandated by HR, how do you maintain any sense of self?
Riker prescribes a highly specific, actionable practice to counter this. He terms it the hermetic signal.
The hermetic signal, what does that look like?
The protocol requires a man to spend 30 minutes daily, completely offline, in absolute silence with no witness but himself.
30 minutes, no witness.
That means no podcasts, no music playing in the background, no screens, no reading material.
Well, just completely unplugged.
Just sitting. The man must simply sit with his own mind to discover what is actually in it. And Riker is very clear the goal of this exercise is not relaxation or mindfulness.
It's not meditation.
No, the goal is jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction, I love that word for this. Reclaiming the territory of your own mind.
Exactly, reclaiming the territory.
Because if your entire internal monologue is just a regurgitation of what Twitter or your boss or the cultural consensus says, you don't actually have a self.
You're empty inside.
Yeah. You're just an antenna broadcasting the panopticon signal.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. By cultivating an interior life that the social mob hasn't pre-approved, a man builds a psychological fortress.
Because he's not relying on them for validation.
Right. If your baseline sense of worth or reality depends entirely on likes or institutional approval or, HR metrics.
Then your soul essentially belongs to the institution.
Precisely. The Hermetic signal builds a formed, independent judgment. A judgment that is capable of saying no and actually meaning it.
Because that no is rooted in a depth that the flat, surveilled world can't reach.
Yes,
You're essentially building the walls thick enough that the cultural cameras can't see through them.
that's a great way to put it.
But this leads to a darker question for me.
Okay.
What happens when the culture's weaponized language and this forced visibility finally crush someone? Because we see this happen constantly. A man's marriage collapses unexpectedly, or his career is stripped away because of an ambiguous complaint.
Or his reputation is vaporized overnight on social media.
Exactly. Riker introduces what he calls the initiation paradox to reframe these moments of total collapse, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And it is a radical reframing of how we process personal ruin.
How does he frame it?
Riker argues that the collapse of a reputation or a career shouldn't be viewed merely as a random tragedy. He frames it as a crucible.
A crucible, so it's burning something away.
Exactly. The underlying theory is that the modern social matrix loans a man his life.
Oh, loans it to him.
Right. It loans him a corporate identity, a social standing, even a modern family dynamic. Riker calls this a borrowed life.
A borrowed life. That's a haunting phrase.
And the Matrix can, and often does, recall that loan at any moment without warning.
Just pulls the rug out.
Yes. When a man finds himself in a state of sudden collapse, he isn't actually discovering his inherent weakness.
What is he discovering?
He is discovering the extent to which his life was borrowed. The fire of the collapse incinerates the false loaned self.
Wow. It reminds me of like a stress test on a massive suspension bridge.
Okay, how so?
If a major earthquake hits a city, the earthquake has no moral compass.
Right, it's just a force of nature.
It doesn't care if a building is innocent or guilty, good or bad. It simply applies pressure, revealing which structures were anchored to solid bedrock and which were built on sand.
That's a perfect parallel.
The collapse isn't the problem. The collapse is the revelation of the flawed foundation.
Exactly. And Riker takes this analysis even deeper by examining the specific tools the culture uses to initiate these collapses.
Like what kind of tools?
Well, he argues that modern institutions primarily execute this through the weaponization of diagnostic language in psychiatry.
Okay, yeah, this part of the book was wild.
It's intense. To illustrate this, he draws a rather chilling historical comparison to the Soviet Union,
Right.
focusing on a prominent Soviet psychiatrist named Andrei Snezhnevsky.
Now, when I first read this section, I actually thought it was a massive leap.
Yeah, a lot of people might think that initially.
Because it is, very common in political discourse to compare literally anything you don't like to the Soviet gulags.
Sure, it's a cliche.
So how does Riker connect Soviet psychiatry to modern institutional dynamics without just sounding like a pure conspiracy theorist?
He completely avoids the conspiracy trap by focusing strictly on the functional mechanisms of power rather than hidden cabals and smoke-filled rooms.
Okay, so focusing on how the machine actually works.
Exactly. In the Soviet system, Snezhnevsky engineered a diagnostic framework based on the premise that nonconformity with Soviet ideals was literally a treatable mental illness.
That's insane.
He created a diagnosis called sluggish schizophrenia.
Sluggish schizophrenia.
Yeah. And its primary symptom was not hallucinations or delusions.
What was it?
Its primary symptom was the insistence on objective truth within a state system built on ideological lies.
Oh my God. So just speaking the truth made you clinically insane.
Yeah. Yes. Political dissidents were thrown into psychiatric wards simply because they questioned the regime's legitimacy.
That is terrifying.
And Riker points out that while the West historically mocked this as barbaric, our modern institutions have quietly adopted the exact same structural mechanism.
Pathologizing noncompliance.
Exactly. Pathologizing noncompliance.
And he bridges the gap between Soviet history and modern America by citing Jonathan Metzel's sociological research, which I thought really anchored the argument.
Yes, Metzel's research at the University of Michigan is absolutely critical here.
Can you break that down for the listener?
Sure. He documented how, during the American Civil Rights era in the 1960s and 70s, the psychiatric establishment effectively weaponized the DSM.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Yeah.
The Psychiatry Bible.
Right. They began reclassifying non-compliant, angry black men who were demanding civil rights as schizophrenic.
Wow. So they literally changed the definition of the disease to fit the political dissidents.
Exactly. The clinical definition of schizophrenia quietly shifted from a disorder marked primarily by social withdrawal and lethargy
which is how it was historically understood.
Right, to one marked by rebellion, hostility, and anti-authoritarianism.
That is a staggering historical precedent.
The historical pattern is undeniable. When an institution cannot logically defeat your argument, it will give you a psychiatric label to discredit your ability to speak in the first place.
Which brings us directly to the modern label. Riker identifies as the ultimate tool for this kind of institutional discrediting.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity. He makes the case that this is not, and has actually never been, a clinical diagnosis.
No, not at all.
It is a political weapon.
It is an engineered status demotion. That's what it is.
A status demotion.
Yeah. Riker analyzes the term toxic masculinity as a textbook example of the Motte-Bailey logical fallacy.
Oh man, I love this concept.
Oh.
Let's really unpack the Motte-Bailey for anyone who might not be familiar with the architecture of that logical fallacy.
It's so useful to know.
Because once you see it, you will literally notice it everywhere in media and HR departments.
Okay, so to understand the fallacy, you have to picture a medieval castle layout.
Right.
You have the motte, which is a highly defensible fortified stone tower built on a steep hill.
The safe zone.
Exactly. And below it is the bailey, which is a sprawling, highly productive, but completely undefendable courtyard and farmland where everyday life happens.
Okay, so the Bailey is where you actually live, but it's hard to descend.
Right. In an argument, the Motte-Bailey fallacy occurs when someone makes a wildly aggressive, expansive claim. They are occupying the Bailey.
Give me an example of the Bailey claim.
For example, an activist might claim that all standard male competitiveness or stoicism or protective instincts are inherently toxic.
Right, condemning totally normal behavior.
Exactly. But when a man rightfully challenges that absurd claim, the activist immediately retreats to the motte.
They run back up the hill to the stone tower.
Exactly, the highly defensible tower. They say, whoa, we are only talking about serial abusers and violent criminals like Harvey Weinstein. Are you defending them?
It is a total bait and switch.
Exactly. Because once the challenger agrees that, of course, criminals are bad, and backs off.
Which any sane person would agree with.
Right. Once they back off, the activist immediately marches right back down into the Bailey and resumes policing everyday, normal male behavior under the guise of fighting abuse.
Man, that is so insidious. You use the extreme, indefensible outlier to justify putting a leash on every single man in the general population.
That is exactly the mechanism.
And Riker points out how this creates a massive, tangible double standard in the corporate world.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about an everyday HR environment. If a female employee starts crying in a high-stakes meeting because she is overwhelmed.
Right, which happens.
Sure. The modern corporate culture in the HR department universally read that as the environment failing her.
Yes, the system put too much pressure on her.
Exactly. They will audit the workload, they'll change policies, and offer accommodations to make her comfortable.
They adapt to her.
But if a male employee shows visible distress,
Right.
if he snaps or cracks under that exact same pressure, he is instantly viewed as unstable.
The liability.
A liability, a red flag. The culture doesn't assume the environment failed him.
No, the culture assumes he is fundamentally broken.
Fundamentally broken, yeah. So, considering this massively rigged game, does Riker actually offer a strategy for navigating an HR department?
Well,
Or is his advice simply to recognize that the game is fixed and walk away?
Riker's advice on this front is bracingly unsentimental.
Unsentimental is a good word for it.
He explicitly states, HR is not your friend, it is not your therapist, and it is not a court of objective justice.
Which people really need to hear.
HR operates as the institutional immune system, and in the current cultural climate, it has frequently identified the assertive, productive male employee as a pathogen.
A pathogen to be neutralized.
Yes. His core advice is to absolutely refuse to play the game on their linguistic terms.
Right. Don't adopt their dictionary.
Exactly. If you walk into an HR mediation trying to explain your context, trying to prove you aren't one of the toxic ones,
You have already lost.
you've already lost.
Because by defending yourself against the label, you've tacitly accepted their premise that your baseline masculinity requires an apology or some kind of explanation.
Precisely. Riker argues that a sovereign man must name the shift in language internally, refuse to adopt their corrupted definitions, and basically be entirely prepared to walk away when honest reciprocal dialogue proves impossible.
So the goal isn't to win the HR battle.
No. The goal is to maintain internal coherence and not surrender your sanity to a bureaucracy.
Which is such a powerful takeaway. But, that transition from the soft power HR to the hard power of the state, That is where this book gets genuinely intimidating.
Oh, absolutely.
When we look at the section on the justice paradox,
Yeah.
Riker argues that if you thought the dictionary was corrupted, the actual courtroom is far worse.
Much worse.
He claims that modern equity frameworks operate as a business model, not as a system of justice.
Right. To ground this, Riker actually returns to the classical definition of justice formulated by Cicero.
Okay, what does Cicero say?
He used the phrase sum cup, which translates to each his due.
To each his due.
Right. It is the principle that justice is highly individualized based on objective actions.
You get what you earn based on the facts of your specific case.
Exactly. But Riker argues that modern institutions have entirely abandoned this in favor of the drumhead tribunal.
A drumhead tribunal.
Yeah, a system where the verdict is decided by public consensus long before the trial even begins.
Based on your identity categories, not your actions.
Yes. Equity, in his view, has morphed into a bureaucratic mechanism designed primarily to distribute prestige, funding, and legal immunity to activists and administrators, completely regardless of the truth.
And he pulls absolutely no punches with his historical examples to prove this.
He really doesn't.
He does a deep dive into the Duke Lacrosse case from 2006.
A classic example.
For those who don't remember, you had a district attorney, Mike Nafong, who literally suppressed exonerating DNA evidence that proved the players were innocent.
He actively hid it.
He hid the evidence because he desperately needed a high-profile narrative win to secure his upcoming election.
Right.
And the institution itself, Duke University, immediately threw its own students to the wolves.
Before a trial even happened.
Right. They suspended the players, and 88 professors signed a public letter essentially denouncing them as avatars of toxic privilege before a single piece of evidence was tested in a lab.
And Riker pairs the Duke case with the infamous Rolling Stone UVA hoax written by Sabrina Erdely.
Oh, yeah. That was a disaster.
That was a completely fabricated story of a horrific gang rape at a fraternity.
Completely made up.
The magazine engaged in zero verification. They completely abandoned fundamental journalistic due diligence and published it anyway.
Why? Why would they risk that?
Because the narrative of unchecked male predation perfectly aligned with the institution's ideological biases.
It was too good of a story to fact check.
Exactly. Riker utilizes these cases not just as examples of, bad journalism or rogue prosecutors, but to prove a terrifying structural reality.
Which is what?
Modern institutions will consistently prioritize public relations speed and ideological conformity over objective truth.
Wow.
They do not care if a man is innocent or guilty. They only care if defending him makes them a PR liability.
The analogy he uses of a conveyor belt really stuck with me here.
Which one was that?
A systemic apologist might look at the justice system and say, well, it's not perfect, but the system works most of the time.
Right, you hear that a lot.
But Riker counters by saying, sure, a conveyor belt works mechanically,
Yeah.
but if that conveyor belt feeds both the innocent and the guilty into the exact same industrial shredder, you don't have a justice system.
No, you don't.
You have a slaughterhouse that happens to file paperwork.
That is a brutal image, but it's accurate.
It is. And nowhere is this institutional bias more starkly codified than in his analysis of the Duluth model.
Oh, the Duluth model, yes.
I had heard passing references to the Duluth model before, but seeing the actual history and mechanics of it laid out is just staggering.
The Duluth model is arguably one of the most consequential yet least understood pieces of ideological architecture operating in modern family law and law enforcement today.
It affects everything.
It really does. It is a psychological and sociological framework created in the 1980s that operates on a very specific, absolute premise.
What's the premise?
It assumes that men are inherently violent as a systemic means to maintain patriarchal control over women.
So male violence is always about patriarchal control.
Exactly. And conversely, it assumes that women are inherently victims whose violence, if it ever occurs at all, is only ever an act of self-defense.
Okay, so it completely binatrizes gender and violence.
Yes. And this ideology wasn't just debated in academia. It was hard-coded into police academy training, mandatory arrest statutes, and batter intervention programs across the entire Western world.
But let me interrupt and play the skeptic here for a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
A critic of Riker would say, look, men are generally larger, they are stronger, and they cause significantly more physical injury when domestic violence occurs.
Right, that's the standard defense.
Doesn't that biological reality justify the Duluth model focusing primarily on male perpetrators?
It is a really common defense, but Riker points out that Focusing on the result of the violence, meaning the physical injury, to determine the cause of the violence, fundamentally corrupts the data and the justice system.
How so?
To dismantle the Duluth premise, Riker contrasts it with the life's work of Murray Strauss.
Tell me, Strauss. Who was he?
Strauss was a pioneering sociologist and the head of the Family Research Laboratory at the University of New Hampshire.
Okay.
He dedicated decades to studying domestic violence empirically, using massive, rigorous data sets.
Real hard data.
Yes. And Strauss's data repeatedly revealed a phenomenon known as gender symmetry.
Gender symmetry, meaning it's equal.
Yes. The empirical evidence showed that women initiate and strike male partners with a frequency that is virtually identical to men.
Identical frequency.
In fact, in non-reciprocal violence, where only one partner is hitting the other women, we're often found to be the primary aggressors.
Really?
Yes. This is not a fringe theory. It is one of criminology's most reliably reproduced conclusions, confirmed by hundreds of studies globally.
Yet it is completely ignored by the family court system and law enforcement.
Completely ignored.
Riker argues that the Duluth model operates on blatant survivorship bias that has been codified into law.
Yes, that's exactly how it functions.
Because, think about it, if a woman attacks a man and the police are called, the Duluth training often instructs the officers to identify the man as the primary aggressor simply because of his size or because he tried to physically restrain her from hitting him.
Right.
The charges against the woman are dropped, so she never enters the criminal data set.
Which skews the statistics.
Massively. The system only studies the men it successfully convicts, and then uses that skewed data to declare that all men are potential abusers.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
The entire machine is rigged to only possess the capacity to see one specific type of victim and one specific type of perpetrator.
Which brings us to the broader macro-level extraction that Riker refers to as the thermodynamic paradox.
The thermodynamic paradox. Explain that.
If the legal and HR systems view men with inherent suspicion, the economic system still demands their output.
Right. Somebody has to pave the roads and fix the power lines.
Exactly. Riker posits that men operate as the battery powering the civilizational grid. They provide the most dangerous labor, the foundational provision, the protection, and the maintenance of physical infrastructure.
The dirty jobs.
Yes. But the grid treats this battery like a dangerous electrical surge that needs to be suppressed.
Wow.
Society aggressively extracts male generative energy without offering any institutional reciprocity, honor, or respect in return.
It basically operates on a very basic law of physics and mechanics.
Right.
Anything that is continually used without maintenance will eventually break down.
It has to.
Society uses men's productive energy relentlessly, but actively denies them the cultural maintenance of respect or dignity. Therefore, men are breaking down.
The statistics are horrifying.
They really are. Riker points to the undeniable tragic spikes in male suicide, the opioid addiction epidemic, deaths of despair, and the unprecedented drop in young men participating in the labor force.
It's a systemic collapse.
He argues these aren't random anomalies or mysterious mental health crises. These are load-bearing walls giving way because the culture has extracted all the horsepower while starving the engine of oil.
And the ultimate insult, Riker notes, is that when the structure finally collapses, when a man drops out of society or falls to addiction, society immediately blames the architect of the building instead of the administrators who stole the maintenance budget.
Man, that hits hard.
It does. But to combat this extraction, Riker offers two highly actionable tools for the listener.
Okay, let's give the listener some tools. What are they?
The first is the reciprocity test. This is a cognitive tool for instantly spotting systemic prejudice.
How does it work?
Whenever you are reading a news headline, evaluating a corporate policy, or looking at a court verdict, simply reverse the sexes.
Just flip the genders.
Yeah. If the situation were reversed, would the media still publish that headline? Would the HR policy still be legal? If the answer is no, you are not looking at an equitable system. You are looking at codified prejudice.
Think about that. Apply that to the Duluth model.
Oh, exactly.
Imagine a psychological framework encoded into police training that defined women as inherently violent by nature and men as perpetual innocent victims.
It would be shut down overnight.
It would be laughed out of academia and dismantled by the Supreme Court in a week.
Exactly. Now, the second tool is much more personal. It is the who pays audit.
The who pays audit. What's that?
Riker suggests that for one entire week, a man must meticulously log every single hour he spends in motion.
Every hour?
Yes. This includes paid corporate labor, commuting, mediating emotional conflicts at home, or arguing with bureaucrats.
Okay.
He must categorize every hour into one of two columns: The first column is building my kingdom.
Building my kingdom. And the second.
Fueling a system that despises me.
Damn.
Riker warns that the resulting data will likely disgust you. But that disgust is necessary. It is the beginning of clarity. It forces a man to track exactly where his finite life energy is leaking.
Okay, so let's say a guy does this audit. He tracks his week and realizes he is bleeding 70% of his energy into a system, a job, or a relationship that fundamentally disrespects him.
Which is very common.
How does he stop the drain? How does he rebuild the foundation? Because this is where the book shifts from diagnosing the culture to rebuilding the individual man.
Right, and the first step is confronting anger in what Riker calls the shadow paradox.
The shadow paradox.
He argues that the modern mandate for men to suppress their anger doesn't actually make a man calm. It makes him dangerously brittle.
This is perhaps one of the most vital psychological insights in the text,
I agree completely.
because Riker really pushes back against the modern therapeutic consensus that anger is inherently toxic.
Right. He cites the landmark emotional suppression studies conducted by psychologists James Gross and Robert Levinson.
From the 1990s, right?
Yes, 1993 and 1997. Their clinical research demonstrated that active emotional suppression, meaning the effortful process of pushing down a genuinely felt emotional response.
Bottling it up.
Exactly, bottling it up. It has severe physiological costs. It literally degrades the brain's ability to form memories, causes massive spikes in cardiovascular load, and impairs higher order cognitive processing.
So if we look at the stereotype of the nice guy CEO, or the hyper-accommodating middle manager who never raises his voice, always smiles through disrespect, but is quietly boiling inside.
Right.
He isn't actually being virtuous. He is actively destroying his own cardiovascular system and degrading his brain's ability to process information.
Precisely. His physical body is carrying the horrific cost of a biological civil war that never reaches the surface.
Until it does.
Right, until he inevitably snaps over something trivial, like spilled coffee or a late email.
Which just reinforces the toxic label.
Exactly. So Riker contrasts this modern toxic demand for male emotional castration with classical philosophy, specifically Aristotle's concept of preotes.
Preotes.
Yes. This Greek term is usually translated into English as gentleness or meekness, which Riker argues is a catastrophic mistranslation that totally strips the word of its power.
The analogy Riker uses here to explain preotes is just incredible. He brings in the concept of the war horse.
Right. Aristotle defined preotes not as a lack of anger, but as the the perfect balance between irrational, explosive wrath on one side and groveling spiritlessness on the other.
So it's harnessed anger.
Yes. It is anger that has been harnessed, directed, and deployed in precise proportion to the demands of justice. Riker uses the image of the destrier.
The heavy cavalry horse.
Right, the heavily armored medieval knight's warhorse. The destrier does not lack aggression. In fact, its aggression and size are the very engines of its utility.
Right, if you take away the aggression, it's useless in battle.
Exactly. If you somehow strip the aggression and power away from a warhorse, you do not get a gentle, useful horse. You get horse meat.
Horse meat, man. And the system wants horse meat because horse meat is easy to manage, easy to package, and easy to consume.
Exactly.
But true sovereignty requires the living warhorse. And this completely flips our modern, highly marketed idea of freedom on its head. Riker calls this the sovereignty paradox.
Yeah, this is a fascinating point.
Because modern consumer culture constantly preaches that freedom is the absolute absence of rules. No alarm clocks, no commitments, no borders, just following your authentic desires wherever they lead.
Do whatever feels good.
Right. But Riker argues that this modern definition of freedom just makes you a biological slave to corporate algorithms and base appetites.
He makes a profound philosophical point here. The man who refuses to impose a rigorous law upon himself will inevitably find law imposed upon him from the outside.
By force.
Usually at the point of a state bayonet or the tip of an HR subpoena, true classical freedom is not the lack of rules.
What is it then?
Classical freedom is the cultivated capacity to choose the good. And that capacity requires the prior intentional enslavement of your base appetites to your higher reason.
Wow.
You are not choosing whether or not to serve a master. You are only choosing which master you will serve.
So how does a man actually choose the right master on a practical level? Riker introduces a protocol he calls the morning ritual of the king.
Yes.
And he makes it clear this is not some optimized tech bro life hack. He frames it as a daily coronation.
The physical execution of the ritual is very exacting.
Walk us through it.
Wake at a fixed early hour, hydrate immediately before consuming any caffeine, engage in rigorous physical movement.
To get swole.
No, not necessarily to build muscle, but to definitively prove to the nervous system that the conscious mind is in command of the body.
Oh, asserting dominance over yourself.
Exactly. Then, read for 10 uninterrupted minutes from a sacred or classical text to align the mind with history. And finally, plan 3 non-negotiable objectives for the day before ever touching email, the news, or social media.
That's a solid morning.
And he links this behavioral protocol directly to Peter Gollwitzer's psychological research on implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions. What is that?
The concept is that you must legislate your behavior in advance during moments when your mind is clear and rational so that you do not have to negotiate with your weaker, fatigued self later in the day.
That makes so much sense. And Riker also connects this daily discipline to the Roman cursus honorum, right? The
Yeah.
sequential ladder of public offices in the Roman Republic.
Yes, the path of honor.
The ancient Romans believed that a man could not possibly be trusted to rule an empire or even a city if he had not first demonstrated total self-command and localized service.
And the morning ritual is the modern, internalized, psychological version of that Roman ladder. You are forging your own spinal column every single morning before the world has a chance to demand your compliance.
Now, I have to jump in here and push back on behalf of the listener because there is a glaring practical issue with this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Riker has a killer quote in this section. Authenticity without discipline is appetite with better branding.
It is a brilliant line.
It's amazing. But how does he suggest a man actually enforce this rigid rule of life on himself when he is completely, utterly exhausted from the thermodynamic drain we just spent 20 minutes discussing?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because when a man is running on absolute empty, bleeding energy to a hostile system, waking up at 5 a.m. to do push-ups and read Marcus Aurelius feels less like a coronation and more like a punishment.
It is a critical challenge, and Riker anticipates it deeply. He does not demand immediate, flawless perfection. He demands a structural shift in how a man interprets his own fatigue.
Interprets the fatigue.
Yes, the exhaustion itself must be reinterpreted. Right now, a drained man reads his exhaustion as evidence of his total defeat.
Right, I'm tired because I'm losing.
Exactly. But Riker argues that once you define your life's mission independently of the corporate system's approval, your exhaustion stops being evidence of defeat and starts becoming evidence of redirection.
Oh, I see.
You are no longer pouring your finite energy into the black hole of institutional appeasement. You begin investing it in your own sovereign structure.
Which actually builds you up over time.
Right. The morning ritual, therefore, doesn't steal your last drop of energy. It is the very battery that generates new energy by automating your choices and sealing up the psychological leaks.
That shifts the perspective entirely. You aren't doing extra work. You are simply refusing to water the systems that are poisoning your well.
Exactly.
I really love that framing. So if we assume a man has secured this internal perimeter, right, he's no longer leaking energy. Moving into the final third of the book, Riker scales this entire philosophy up.
He takes it macro.
He moves from the individual man's psyche to the fate of entire civilizations. Why does doing this quiet, internal work in your living room matter to the broader world? This brings us to a really dense philosophical section called the Logos Paradox and the limits of pure logic.
Riker asserts a profound, almost theological point here. Reason alone, without a higher order or a telos, an ultimate purpose, is highly destructive. Pure logic can be a weapon.
Yes. Unmoored reason leads to either pure nihilism, where nothing matters and everything is deconstructed, or it leads to endless bureaucracy, where mindless compliance replaces actual virtue. Which feels very much like where we are now.
Right. To illustrate this, he uses the life of the 20th century French philosopher Simone Weil.
Wow.
She was a brilliant, rigorous, Marxist-leaning rationalist who exhausted the absolute limits of academic philosophy until she encountered a reality that was far larger than her materialist categories.
She came to the realization that if the human mind possesses the capacity to comprehend the physical universe, from decoding the DNA genome to plotting orbital mechanics, then the human mind and the physical universe must share a common underlying architecture.
They map onto each other.
Right. Materialism and random chance cannot explain that resonance. It points to a rational, foundational mind at the base of reality. The Greeks called this the logos.
Exactly. The logos is the intelligible, divine order of reality. Riker argues that if a man merely uses his intellect to cynically debunk, critique, and tear down every institution around him without intentionally serving the logos.
Without building anything.
Exactly. he will eventually find himself standing in the smoking rubble of his own life, completely homeless. And he will mistakenly call that destruction clarity.
Ouch.
Reason must be subordinated to the good, or it will inevitably consume itself and the man wielding it.
Which opens the door to a concept I genuinely never expected to find in a book focused on men's rights and institutional critique.
The synchronicity paradox.
The synchronicity paradox.
Yeah.
The idea of meaningful coincidences. You have a vivid dream about an old mentor, and he calls you out of the blue the very next morning.
Right.
The modern hyper-rational materialist immediately dismisses that as mere confirmation bias or a statistical anomaly. But Riker brings in some absolute heavy hitters from the world of science to defend the concept.
He brings in Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, and Wolfgang Pauli.
And we should note who Pauli was.
Right. It is crucial to note that Pauli was a Nobel laureate and one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics.
Not a lightweight.
No. Together, the psychoanalyst and quantum physicist developed the synchronicity hypothesis.
What did they propose?
They proposed the existence of the unus mundus, a Latin term for the one world. It's a unitary, underlying fabric of reality where psyche and physical matter are deeply intertwined.
So mind and matter are connected at the base level.
In this framework, a meaningful coincidence isn't a glitch in the matrix. It is a seam showing the actual stitching of reality.
Okay, but let me play the skeptic again.
Yeah.
If you tell a man who is already feeling isolated and alienated from society to start looking for hidden signs in the fabric of reality, doesn't that sound like a fast track to magical thinking?
It definitely can be.
That is exactly how people end up joining cults or losing their grip on reality, just following every random coincidence as a divine mandate.
Riker is highly aware of that danger, which is why he does not advocate for blind mystical obedience. He provides 4 incredibly rigorous practical tests that a man must apply before he ever acts on a perceived synchronicity.
4 tests. Walk us through them.
First is the moral vector. Does this sign call you toward greater courage, difficult duty, and objective truth? Or does it conveniently excuse a personal vice and encourage you to flee from responsibility?
That's a great filter.
Second is counsel. You must speak the synchronicity aloud to a trusted man who loves the truth more than he loves your comfort.
Oh, I like that.
If the idea sounds insane or self-serving when spoken out loud to a peer, it is likely just a transient mood.
What's the third?
Third is reversibility. If you act on it, take a modest, reversible step. Do not burn the bridge or sell your house immediately based on a dream.
Common sense, but necessary.
And fourth, observe the fruit over time. Does walking this path make you a more responsible, effective, and grounded leader, or does it make you more paranoid, erratic, and isolated?
The fruit judges the tree. If following the synchronicity leads to greater virtue and order in your life, the skeptic's argument about statistical confirmation bias becomes totally irrelevant.
Exactly. You cannot argue with a healthy harvest.
No, you can't. And man, if we look at the macro picture Riker paints in the civilizational paradox, we desperately need a good harvest right now.
We really do.
Because he argues that the cultural crop is dying. He makes the massive claim that the modern administrative state has systematically usurped the role of the father.
This is his macro-level diagnosis of our current cultural decay. Riker relies heavily on Oswald Spengler's theory regarding the seasons of high cultures. Spengler argued that every major civilization goes through a life cycle, a spring of rootedness, religion, and tradition, eventually decaying into a winter of massive administrative bureaucracy, secularism, and sterility.
And Riker applies this to us today.
Yes. He applies this specifically to the modern West, pointing to the year 1973 as a fatal civilizational hinge point.
1973, the OPEC oil crisis.
Yes. The oil crisis deeply punished male-dominated physical industry and manufacturing. Simultaneously, the sweeping introduction of no-fault divorce laws fundamentally destabilized male domestic authority.
A double hit.
Riker argues that the sprawling welfare state quickly slid into the structural vacancy left by the evicted or economically marginalized father.
The state stepped in to play dad.
Exactly. The state became the ultimate financial provider, the family court system became the ultimate moral judge, and the public school system became the ultimate ideological educator.
Which leaves the actual father where?
The physical American suburb essentially transformed into a comfortable holding pen for men who were working purely to fund their own institutional replacement.
That is just. It is a massive civilizational transfer of authority. Authority is stripped from the man who actually builds and bleeds for the household and handed over to the bureaucratic institution that merely taxes it.
It's a profound shift.
There's a great maxim: authority without responsibility is tyranny, which perfectly describes the modern administrative state. Responsibility without authority is slavery, which perfectly describes the modern father who is expected to pay for everything while having zero say in how his children are raised. So, what is the fix for this? Riker suggests adopting an audit process inspired by the Amish.
He does, and it is a brilliant comparison. He notes that the Amish do not survive and thrive because they are primitive or stupid.
Right, they're very intentional.
They survive because they are highly sophisticated in how they audit technology and cultural integration. Before adopting any new tool, they ask one ruthless question: does this practice strengthen or weaken the cohesion of the household across 3 generations?
That's the only metric that matters to them.
Riker argues that the modern sovereign man must adopt this exact, ruthless standard to protect his own household from the state's ideological capture.
Which brings us to the final synthesis of the book. We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
A lot of ground.
The linguistic virus in the dictionary, the weaponization of HR and the courts, the thermodynamic drain of male energy, the shadow of suppressed anger, the necessity of the logos, and the fall of the civilizational father.
It's a comprehensive worldview.
So how does one individual man hold all of this heavy psychological infrastructure together day after day without losing his mind?
Routine.
Riker answers this with his final protocol, the Daily Circle.
Yes. The Daily Circle is the mechanism for ultimate psychological integration. It is not just another journaling exercise, it is a nightly sovereign council.
A nightly sovereign council. I love the weight of that.
It is a strict protocol of 6 steps that a man must run every single evening to ensure his internal infrastructure holds against the pressure of the panopticon.
Let's walk through what this internal council looks like in practice. The first thing the man must confront is the ego check.
Right.
He has to ask himself, am I inflated today believing that the rules don't apply to me because I've swallowed the red pill? Or am I crushed, believing my failures are permanent?
Both extremes are dangerous.
Both of those extremes are forms of tyranny that prevent clear thinking. He must forcibly recenter himself on functional, grounded humility. Once the ego is checked, he moves to the shadow check.
What does that entail?
He asks, what anger or truth did I actively suppress today to keep the peace? And who did I project my own insecurities onto?
Following that is the anima check. The man must honestly evaluate if his inner emotional life has gone completely numb.
Which is so easy to do.
Is he consuming pornography, drinking heavily, or endlessly scrolling on his phone simply to avoid engaging with the reality of his own soul?
And then comes the mission check. He asks a binary question. Did I build, protect, teach, or serve today? Because Riker insists that a day without a concrete mission is a day consumed entirely by cultural noise.
The 5th step grounds him in history, the gratitude check.
Gratitude.
He asks what is owed and to whom. It is a vital recognition that no man builds himself from scratch. He carries a sacred duty forward from his ancestors, his mentors, and the men who bled before him.
And finally, the council ends with a single concrete decree for tomorrow.
Not a sprawling wish list.
No, not a vague goal. One specific, measurable order that he issues to himself and that he will obey without question when he wakes up.
And Riker roots the efficacy of this nightly council firmly in modern neurological science.
Okay.
He cites Roy Baumeister's extensive research showing that human self-regulation and willpower operate exactly like a physical muscle. It depletes with use during the day, but strengthens its baseline capacity over time when exercised properly.
Oh, okay.
He also weaves in Charles Duhigg's work on how intentional habit loops physically rewire the basal ganglia in the brain.
So it's biological.
The Daily Circle is not mystical self-help. It is a neurological immune response system designed to detect psychological drift before it solidifies into a permanent, cynical worldview.
And when you look at the totality of this system, what does this all mean in the end? I noticed something incredibly profound in the final pages.
What was that?
Riker spends this entire massive volume meticulously detailing the systemic double standards rigged against men.
Right.
How the culture allows women to be wildly emotional while men are clinically punished for it. How female privacy is fiercely protected by law while male privacy is treated as a criminal conspiracy. But when he finally describes the end goal, the fully integrated man, whom he calls the exiled king who has reclaimed his throne, he points out a final, ultimate paradox.
The ultimate paradox of the book is that the fully integrated king refuses to adopt a double standard himself.
Yes, that is it. The fully sovereign man looks at the rigged game and doesn't say, Well, she is allowed to be emotional and unaccountable, therefore I'm allowed to be resentful and unaccountable.
No, he doesn't lower his standards.
He holds himself to a higher classical law, regardless of the culture's total corruption. He demands absolute symmetry, justice, and discipline of himself, even when the world offers him none of those things in return. It is the ultimate, final rejection of the victim mindset.
It is the assumption of absolute, terrifying responsibility. The integrated man does the internal work without demanding narration, without seeking negotiation with HR, and entirely without the culture's permission. By doing so, he aligns himself with the logos and he becomes fundamentally unmovable.
I'm absolutely blown away by the depth of the architecture in this book.
It's a masterpiece.
And it brings me to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over on your own as we wrap up.
Leave them with something to chew on.
If Riker's macro-level diagnosis is correct, if the administrative state really has replaced the father with a sprawling bureaucracy, and if that bureaucracy is now visibly failing, I mean, we see it in the collapsing birth rates, a total loss of institutional trust, the crushing economic strain.
It's all around us.
What if the current institutional collapse we are all witnessing isn't actually the end of the world?
What if it's the beginning?
Exactly. What if this collapse is the exact necessary environment required for men to forge a new, incorruptible sovereignty from the ground up? What if the burning down of the borrowed life is exactly what needs to happen to clear the brush and build something real?
That is the ultimate macro application of the initiation paradox. The cultural fire is painful, but it is finally revealing the bedrock.
Exactly. The X-ray machine of modern culture is totally broken. The definitions in the dictionary are murky and weaponized, but the shadow maps the territory if you have the courage to look at it.
Beautifully said.
This has been an incredibly dense, fascinating journey. Listen to me, you need to go to Amazon, Kindle, and Google Playbooks right now.
Go do it.
Do not wait. Buy Paradox's Thought Expander. Read it with a pen in hand. Audit your life.
It is a text that will fundamentally alter the lens through which you read the world around you.
And if you want to dive deeper into this framework, you need to follow the author directly. Go to Substack and follow @ConradRiker. Find him on Twitter @ConradRiker. And subscribe to his YouTube channel @ConradRiker.
Join the conversation he's starting.
Join that network of men who are actively building the alternative to the Panopticon. And finally, one last reminder from us, please hit that like and subscribe button for this show so we can keep bringing you these deep dives into massive paradigm-shifting sources.
We appreciate the support.
Until next time, keep examining the shadow.